Hey everybody, Jem Schofield here, and welcome to the Canon EOS R5 and R6 video training series. This series is designed to focus on the video-specific features of these cameras, and in this particular video, we're going to be talking about both the R5 and the R6 in relation to external recording with the cameras, so let's go. So let's talk about external recording with both the R5 and the R6. And a lot of the data in this video is the same for both cameras, but there will be a couple of differences. So with both cameras, currently you can record externally to a recorder at up to 4K resolutions and up to 59.94 frames per second. And the only big difference is that with this particular camera, you can also record 4K DCI or 4096 by 2160, a 17:9 aspect ratio externally, and the R6 is UHD resolution only in terms of 4K. Before we jump into the menus and talk about setting up the camera for external recording, let's talk about cabling and the signal. Now, I do have a little bit of an unconventional setup here, and that's because we're here in the studio and it's for educational purposes, but normally we would have a shorter HDMI cable that would be going to this recorder, probably on the hot shoe of the camera or in a rig. But speaking of cabling, one of the most important things that you need to make sure you have is an HDMI 2.0 compliant cable. I do here, and that's so that I can get those higher resolutions and frame rates to the external recorder. Otherwise, you may be limited on the output there, and you won't be able to see your menus and things like that. We're going to go into the menu here, and this will apply to both cameras. And you can see here that we are in the Setup For menu, and we're going to go into HDMI resolution, and we want to make sure that that's set to auto because we want to make sure that the resolution that's being spit out can support those higher frame rates and also be seen by the external recorder. Once we set that up, we're going to go over here to our Shoot 8 menu, and this is where a lot of our choices are in terms of setting up stuff inside of the camera. We want to make sure that on either of these two cameras, we have it set up to dual display. That's going to allow us to take advantage of the autofocus features and touch autofocus using the screen built into the R5 and the R6. And you will see here that on the R6, the only big difference is that when we have dual display set up, that we cannot record both internally and externally with the camera system, whereas with the R5 you can. Now, once that's selected, we're going to go down into our timecode options and scroll down to HDMI, and we're going to turn our timecode on, which means it's going to be feeding timecode out to our external recorder so that they match between the camera and the recorder, and also our record command, and we're going to turn that on. And what that does is it makes sure that we can trigger, once this is set up correctly, external recording by pressing record on the camera itself. Of course, with the R5, it can record internally and externally when we trigger that. If we're using the R6, then we are just triggering external recording in this situation. So now I'm just going to go over to Shoot 1 and check my recording. You can see that currently I have this set up for UHD 4K at 59.94, and on the R5 I could again record in DCI or 4KD with the camera. And then the All-I and IPB settings I cover in the recording options video, and this would apply to internal recording with the R5 when I'm also externally recording with the camera. It doesn't really have anything to do with the signal that's being sent out from here to the external recorder. And the last thing to talk about in this menu is the 4K HQ mode. And when I enable that, I do have different options. When we go into movie record size now, we do not have that high frame rate recording option. We can't go up to 59.94, but we do have the ability to have that oversampled 8K image in a 4K resolution. And we can, again, take advantage of this externally. So in this case, I'm going to do UHD 4K, and I'm going to choose my resolution, 23.98, and say OK. So when recording to this external recorder now, we're getting an even better quality image going over the HDMI terminal. One thing to note is that when you use this 4K HQ mode, that you may have reduced recording times because it is generating a lot of heat within the camera. So if you want extended record times, I would disable that when you're sending your signal to an external recorder. So the other decisions you have to make when you are externally recording with these cameras is how you are sending that signal out. Are you going to go into Shoot 2 and turn on HDR PQ? Again, as mentioned in another video in this series, this is something that I would only do if you're being requested to do that by your production. Or are we going to go in here and turn that off and step out and go to Shoot 3 and either record externally using picture styles. So this is the signal that will be sent out in terms of the look of the image, though of course it will now be 10-bit, it will be 422, but it'll still be using the picture styles. Or you're going to be using Canon log, which for a lot of people will be the way that you set up the camera to externally record. So we have Canon log selected here, and then of course we have all of our different options. In this case, what I would generally do with the R5 and the R6 is send out my color matrix set to neutral, and I'm going to leave my color space in BT 709. And now we're going to talk a little bit about why we would use an external recorder. In this case, we're using the Atomos Ninja 5, which is one of the more popular recorders to use with a camera like the R5 or the R6. There are other recorders on the market, and you'll have to check their features and how to set them up to communicate properly with your camera if you're using those. And the first thing is, let's just go ahead and take a look at our record options. One of the big reasons that we would use an external recorder is so that we can record in a different format, for instance, ProRes, and I'm going to go ahead and choose ProRes HQ, and also we can generally get longer record times when we're recording externally with a device like this. Now I'm going to go over to our input options, and we want to make sure this is set up so that the settings that we had in the cameras match what's going to happen over here. So with this current firmware, which is 10.52, with the device, I'm going to go over here to remote, and I'm going to make sure that that reads calibration length. And then over here in the second row, I'm going to make sure that trigger is set to HDMI, and you can see that that trigger is now on. What does that mean? It means that when I press record on my camera, it will trigger the recording on the external device. And with the R5, it will record internally as well. If I press record on the recorder, but I do not press it on the camera itself, then it will only record to this device. And then the last thing I'm going to do here under input is turn on legalize, and you'll see that the exposure values change and the waveform monitor will actually change as well. And that's to make sure that there's a match between what we would be recording with our external recorder and internally to the camera. Now, I'm going to go over here and take a look at a couple of other things. You can see that there are a lot of exposure tools and things that we can use on here as well. Another advantage possibly for using an external recorder. But we're going to go over here to our LUTs. I've loaded a couple of LUTs in here. The first one here is a BT 709 Canon log. So that's our gamut and our gamma. And that's going to then convert with the LUT that image to a BT 709 space and also a YDR gamma. So if I go into monitor over here and I activate the LUT, because native is the actual native signal, we can see that change there on the screen. And if I go back to LUTs over here, you'll see that I have some options. One of them is I could in fact bake that lookup table into my recorded image if I chose that option. I don't want to do that. I just want to use it for monitoring purposes. And then I can also push that LUT if I'm going and doing a pass-through to some sort of external monitor. So if I was in a workflow where, for instance, I was shooting with the R5 and I had a pass-through to a video village or to a client, they could see a LUTed image as well to that external monitor. So it's a nice feature inside of here. And again, back to monitor over here, there's our native and also our LUTed image. So now we're all set up. I'm going to press record on the R5. You will see that little box that surrounds that. I'm also recording, in this case, internally to the camera as well. And we'll just put a little bit of movement onto this image just so we can see it there. And you can see that. And then I'm going to stop recording. It will stop recording to this device. I'm going to press play. It's going to go into the playback mode here. There's the log capture, even though I was LUTing the image for monitoring purposes. And if you are using a different recorder on the market, make sure you check the documentation for that to make sure it is used properly with these two cameras. So there you have it. That is an overview of external recording with both the R5 and the R6. And hopefully that will help you going forward with your productions. The goal is always education, so I hope you learned something here. Thanks for watching.